Welcome to the Revenge Kitchen, where cheaters burn and payback is well done.
David Mitchell stared at his phone as it buzzed for the 15th time that day. The unknown number flashed across the screen like an accusation, and he felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach. 20 years. 20 years of this harassment, and it never got easier. Standard Chartered Recovery Services appeared on his caller ID. He could practically recite their script by heart now. They wanted Rajesh Bhatia, and they wanted him desperately. What they didn't understand, what David had tried explaining countless times, was that Rajesh Bhatia no longer owned this number. David did. The irony wasn't lost on him that the number he'd fought so hard to keep, the number he'd bought with his first real achievement, had become his personal nightmare. Back in 2004, that Sony Ericsson K300i had felt like freedom. The premium SIM card that came with it was supposed to be his entry into the modern world, not a portal to someone else's financial ruin. He pressed decline and added another number to his ever-growing blocked contacts list. The phone immediately rang again. Different number, same story. "David Mitchell," he answered wearily. "Is this Rajesh Bhatia?" The voice was crisp, professional, and entirely too familiar with this routine. "No, this is David Mitchell. You've reached the wrong number. Mr. Bhatia hasn't owned this number for over 20 years. Sir, our records show this number is associated with Mr. Bhatia's loan application from 2003, David finished. "Yes, I know. I've explained this to your company approximately 47 times. Your records are outdated." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for David to hear the muffled sounds of a call center in the background. Keyboards clicking, other conversations bleeding through thin cubicle walls, the distant hum of fluorescent lights that seemed to exist in every corporate building he'd ever entered. "Sir, we need to update our records. Can you provide Mr. Bhatia's current contact information?" This was always the moment that tested David's patience. For 20 years, he'd been saying the same thing. "I don't know Mr. Bhatia. I've never met Mr. Bhatia. I have no idea where Mr. Bhatia is or how to reach him." But today felt different. Today, the name carried weight beyond the usual annoyance. Rajesh Bhatia. Why did that name feel significant beyond its association with his phone troubles? "I'm sorry, I don't have that information," David said, his voice carrying 2 decades of practiced politeness. "You'll need to find him through other means." He hung up and immediately opened his notes app, adding tally marks to a document he'd been keeping since 2015. Today's count, 15 calls so far, and it wasn't even noon. David's apartment reflected his methodical nature. Clean lines, organized shelves, everything in its designated place. The living room overlooked downtown Seattle's skyline, and on clear days, he could see Mount Rainier in the distance. His laptop sat open on the dining table, multiple monitors creating a command center for his work as a senior developer at Nexus Technologies. The company had been his professional home for 7 years now, ever since he'd graduated and entered the corporate world. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable, and stability mattered to someone whose phone life had been chaos for 2 decades. His phone buzzed with a text from his friend Sarah. "Coffee later. I have some intel about your mortgage pre-approval." Sarah Kim had been his closest friend since their college days, and one of the few people who truly understood his phone number saga. As a financial advisor, she'd helped him navigate the occasional credit report confusion that arose from sharing a number with a financial ghost. David typed back, "Definitely, the calls are particularly aggressive today, 15 and counting. Oof, maybe it's time to finally change the number." He stared at her message for a long moment. She'd been suggesting this for years, and every time, something in him rebelled against the idea. This number represented something, his first real achievement, bought with money he'd earned through academic excellence. The principle of the thing mattered. Why should he be the one to change because someone else had abandoned their responsibilities? "You know my answer to that," he replied. "Stubborn as always, see you at 3. David smiled despite his frustration. Sarah's directness was one of the things he valued most about their friendship. In a world where people often said what they thought you wanted to hear, she told him what he needed to hear. His work phone rang, the office landline that connected directly to his desk. This one, at least, he knew would be legitimate. "David Mitchell, Development Team." "David, it's Evelyn from HR. Do you have a few minutes? We need to discuss your reassignment." David felt his stomach drop. Reassignment usually meant one of two things, promotion or problem. Given that no one had mentioned a promotion recently, he suspected the latter. Of course, should I come to your office? Actually, let's meet in conference room, this involves a few other people. The corporate euphemisms weren't lost on him. A few other people in HR speak usually meant your new manager and possibly someone from legal. David saved his work and headed toward the elevator, his mind racing through possibilities. Conference Room B was on the 15th floor, one level up from his usual territory. The elevator felt slower than usual, or maybe that was just his nerves. He'd always been a model employee, punctual, thorough, team-oriented. What could this be about? Evelyn Patterson was waiting for him with two other people he didn't recognize. Evelyn was in her early 50s, with short silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from handling workplace dramas for decades. She gestured for him to sit across from her. David, I'd like you to meet Rajesh Bhatia, who will be your new project manager, and Linda Morrison from legal. The world tilted. David felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the man across the table. Medium build, expensive suit, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The man extended his hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate acceptance. Pleasure to meet you, David. I've heard great things about your work. David shook the offered hand automatically, his mind reeling. Rajesh Bhatia. The Rajesh Bhatia whose financial ghosts had been haunting David's phone for 20 years was sitting across from him, introducing himself as his new boss. Raj comes to us from our sister company following the merger, Evelyn continued, oblivious to David's shock. He'll be taking over the Pinnacle project, and we're assembling a new team around him. Pinnacle project? David managed to ask, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. Raj leaned forward with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. It's a comprehensive system overhaul for our client base. High visibility, significant budget, the kind of project that can really make careers. I specifically requested you for the team based on your reputation. The irony was suffocating. The man whose abandoned financial responsibilities had been disrupting David's life for 2 decades was now positioned to control his professional future. David struggled to maintain his composure as the meeting continued. The project launches next month, Evelyn said, sliding a folder across the table. This contains your new responsibilities, reporting structure, and timeline. Any questions? David's mind was a hurricane of questions, but none that he could ask in this setting. When do I start reporting to Mr. Bhatia? Monday, Raj answered with a smile. I'm looking forward to working with you, David. I have a feeling we're going to accomplish great things together. As the meeting concluded and handshakes were exchanged, David felt like he was moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. He made appropriate responses, nodded at the right moments, and somehow managed to maintain professional composure until he was alone in the elevator. The elevator descended 15 floors, but David felt like he was falling much further. The first Monday under Rajesh Bhatia's management, David arrived at the office with a sense of foreboding that proved entirely justified. By 9:15 a.m., his email inbox contained 17 new messages, each marked with the red exclamation point of urgent priority. Team meeting in conference room A, 9:30 a.m., attendance mandatory, R. Bhatia. The message had been sent at 9:13 a.m. David grabbed his notebook and headed to the conference room, where he found 6 other developers looking equally bewildered. Raj stood at the head of the table, suit perfectly pressed despite the early hour, projector already running with a slide titled Excellence Through Accountability. Good morning, team, Raj began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I know this is short notice, but I believe in striking while the iron is hot. We have 17 days to deliver a complete system architecture for the Pinnacle project, and I don't believe in wasting time. David felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Another call for Rajesh Bhatia, no doubt. The bitter irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. While David dealt with the fallout from this man's financial irresponsibility, Raj stood before them preaching accountability. David, Raj's voice cut through his thoughts. I need you to lead the database integration module, full documentation, testing protocols, and implementation timeline by Wednesday. Wednesday of this week, David asked, incredulous. That's typically a 2-week deliverable. Raj's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. I don't operate on typical timelines, David. I operate on results. Is that going to be a problem? The conference room fell silent. David felt the weight of 6 pairs of eyes watching his response. In his peripheral vision, he could see Evelyn Patterson passing by the glass wall, her expression unreadable. No problem, David said finally. I'll need to adjust my other commitments, but I can make it work. Excellent, that's the kind of can-do attitude that drives success. The meeting continued for another hour, with Raj systematically overwhelming each team member with impossibly tight deadlines and expanding scope requirements. By the time they were dismissed, David felt like he'd been conscripted into some sort of corporate warfare. Back at his desk, David found 3 more urgent emails from Raj, each sent during the meeting they'd just concluded. How was that even possible? His personal phone rang, another blocked number. David Mitchell. This is Consolidated Debt Recovery. We're looking for Rajesh Bhatia regarding an outstanding balance of rupee 2,847,000. David nearly choked. 2,800,000 rupees. Even with exchange rates, that was a staggering amount of debt. I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. Sir, this number is listed as Mr. Bhatia's primary contact for multiple accounts. Are you related to Mr. Bhatia? For the first time in 20 years, David paused before giving his standard response. He was related to Rajesh Bhatia now, professionally, unfortunately, unavoidably. No, he said finally, I'm not related to him. But as he hung up, an idea began forming in the back of his mind. A dangerous, probably unethical, absolutely tempting idea. 2 weeks into working under Raj, David had documented a clear pattern of behavior that went far beyond demanding management. This was systematic psychological warfare. Raj scheduled mandatory meetings during lunch breaks, ensuring his team never had uninterrupted personal time. He sent emails at all hours, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., weekends, with demands for immediate responses. When team members missed these after-hours communications, they faced public criticism in the next team meeting. Time management is a reflection of character, Raj would say, his voice carrying disappointed authority. If you can't manage your email, how can I trust you to manage our clients' needs? The worst part was how he targeted individuals. David watched as Evelyn Liu, a brilliant junior developer, slowly crumbled under Raj's constant micromanagement. Her confident presentations became hesitant stumbles. Her innovative code suggestions dried up entirely. Evelyn, Raj said during one particularly brutal review, I'm seeing a pattern of declining performance. Perhaps this level of responsibility isn't the right fit. David saw the devastation in Evelyn's eyes and felt something snap inside him. This wasn't management. It was abuse with a corporate veneer. His phone rang during the meeting, unknown number. Normally, David would decline and continue focusing on work. But today, with Raj's voice droning on about performance optimization and accountability metrics, David felt a spark of rebellion. He stepped out of the conference room to take the call. David Mitchell. Good afternoon, this is Premium Loan Services. We're attempting to locate Mr. Rajesh Bhatia regarding several defaulted accounts. Our records show this as his contact number. David glanced back at the conference room, where Raj was now gesturing emphatically while Evelyn stared at her hands. What kind of accounts? Personal loans, credit cards, and a business loan that's been in default since 2003. The total outstanding amount is approximately 4,200,000, including interest and penalties. 4.2 million rupees. David did quick math, roughly 50,000 US dollars, a life-changing amount of debt in India. That's substantial. Yes, sir. We've been trying to reach Mr. Bhatia for 19 years. If you have any information about his current whereabouts or contact information, it would be greatly appreciated. David stared through the glass wall at Raj, who was now pointing at a spreadsheet while Evelyn nodded miserably. I don't have his personal contact information, David said slowly, but I might be able to help you reach him. That would be wonderful, sir. Any assistance would be greatly appreciated. Let me get back to you on that. David ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, his heart pounding. What was he considering? It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward would change everything. His work phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How's the new boss working out?" He typed back, "Remember the phone number situation." "The Rajesh Bhatia calls? What about them?" "He's my new manager." Three dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Are you kidding me?" "I wish." "Coffee now, emergency session." David returned to the conference room to find Raj dismissing the team with a list of new deliverables. "David, I need to see you privately." The others filed out, Evelyn's shoulders slumped in defeat. When they were alone, Raj's practiced smile disappeared entirely. "I noticed you took a personal call during our meeting." "It was urgent," David said carefully. "David, I think we need to establish some ground rules about professional behavior. When I'm speaking, you listen. When we're in meetings, your phone is off. When I give you deadlines, you meet them without excuses. Are we clear?" David felt 20 years of suppressed frustration crystallizing into something harder, sharper. Crystal clear. "Good, I'd hate for us to get off on the wrong foot. I've heard you're quite talented, and I'd like to see that talent directed productively." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. David nodded and left the conference room, his decision already made. Sarah's coffee shop was busy with the afternoon crowd, but she'd claimed their usual corner table by the window. David found her scrolling through her tablet, her expression serious. "Okay," she said without preamble as he sat down, "tell me everything." David related the story of his reassignment, the meeting, and the slow realization of who his new manager was. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more incredulous with each detail. "So the guy who's been making your phone ring for 20 years is now your boss, and he's also apparently a nightmare manager." That about sums it up. This is either the worst luck in the history of coincidences, or the universe has a seriously twisted sense of justice. David pulled out his phone and showed her his call log. "Look at today alone, 15 calls all looking for Rajesh Bhatia. The amounts they're mentioning are getting larger." Sarah studied the numbers. "David, some of these are from major financial institutions. This isn't small-time debt. What kind of money are we talking about?" The last caller mentioned over 4 million rupees in defaulted loans. Sarah's eyes widened. "That's serious fraud territory. You don't accidentally default on that kind of money." She paused, studying his face. "What are you thinking?" David stared out the window at the Seattle street scene. Office workers hurried past, everyone focused on their own problems, their own deadlines, their own small corner of the corporate world. "I'm thinking about how many people he's hurt. At work, I mean." Evelyn Liu looked like she was going to cry today. "And the phone calls." 20 years, Sarah. 20 years of harassment because he was too cowardly to deal with his own debts. And now he gets to walk into my office and make my professional life hell too. Sarah leaned forward. "Okay, but let's think about this practically. What exactly could you do? You can't exactly announce to the office that your boss is a debt dodger." "But I could give those debt collectors his current contact information." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "David, that's a nuclear option. You realize that, right? If he finds out you're the one who gave them his information." "How would he find out? I've been getting these calls for 20 years. For all he knows, they tracked him down independently." "What about your job? If this blows up, if he gets fired or arrested, and somehow it comes back to you?" David had been wondering the same thing. "I've been documenting everything. His management style, the impossible deadlines, the way he treats the team. If this job becomes untenable, at least I'll have evidence for HR." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. "Can I ask you something? What's really driving this? Is it justice or is it revenge?" The question hit harder than David expected. He thought about Evelyn's defeated expression, about the emails at 2 a.m., about 20 years of phone calls from strangers demanding to speak to a man who'd apparently abandoned responsibility wherever he found it. "Maybe both," he admitted. "Is that terrible?" "It's human," Sarah said. "But humans make mistakes when they're angry. If you're going to do this, you need to be smart about it." "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled up a notes app on her tablet. First, you need more information. You know his name and that he's from your area originally, but what else? What companies has he worked for? What's his financial situation now? Does he have family? The more you know, the better you can predict how this plays out. How do I find that information? Leave that to me. I have access to financial databases for work. Let me see what I can find about Mr. Rajesh Bhatia's current situation. David felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Sarah, I don't want to drag you into this. You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm volunteering. Besides, she grinned, I've been listening to you complain about those phone calls for 7 years. I'm invested in this story now. They spent another hour planning David's next steps. Sarah would research Raj's background, David would continue documenting workplace behavior, and they'd meet again in a few days to assess options. As they prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed his arm. David, promise me something. If this starts to feel too dangerous, or if you think it might seriously damage your career, you'll step back. Okay. David nodded, though part of him wondered if he'd already passed the point of no return. The following Monday brought news that would change everything. David arrived at the office to find an email from Evelyn Patterson announcing a company-wide meeting about the recent merger developments. All staff, conference room A, 10 a.m. We'll be discussing organizational changes and new reporting structures. David grabbed his coffee and headed to the main conference room, which was packed with employees from both companies. Evelyn stood at the front with several executives he didn't recognize, all wearing the slightly uncomfortable expressions of people about to deliver potentially unwelcome news. Good morning, everyone. As you know, our merger with Pinnacle Solutions has created new opportunities for growth and collaboration. Today, we're implementing a new organizational structure that will help us leverage the combined expertise of both teams. She clicked to the next slide, revealing an organizational chart that made David's blood run cold. There, in a box labeled Project Management Senior Level, was Raj's full name, Rajesh Kumar Bhatia. But it was the information beneath his name that made David's hands tremble slightly. Previous position, Senior Project Manager, Pinnacle Solutions, 2015-2024. Education, B.Tech, Regional Engineering College, Kurukshetra, 1999-2003. David's mind raced. Regional Engineering College, Kurukshetra, that was less than 50 kilometers from his own hometown. The same region, the same time period when the phone number would have been issued with that area code. The new structure will allow for better resource allocation and project oversight, Evelyn continued, but David was no longer listening. He was thinking about his old mentor, Mr. Patel, who had taught at the government school in their area for over 3 decades. If anyone would remember a student named Rajesh Bhatia from that time period, it would be him. After the meeting, David returned to his desk and immediately called Mr. Patel's number. Namaste, David Bhatia, came the warm, familiar voice. How are you? It's been too long. Namaste, sir. I'm well, thank you. I hope you and Auntie are keeping good health. Yes, we are managing. What brings you to call today? David paused, choosing his words carefully. Sir, I wanted to ask you about a student you might have taught. Someone named Rajesh Bhatia, probably graduated around 2000 or 2001. There was a long silence on the other end. When Mr. Patel spoke again, his voice had changed significantly. Rajesh Bhatia. Yes, I remember him very well. David, why are you asking about him? The tone made David's stomach clench. He's my new manager at work. Why do you sound concerned? David, that boy was trouble from the beginning. Very intelligent, very charming, but completely without conscience. His father came to me several times during his final years, worried about Rajesh's behavior. What kind of behavior? He was taking money from other students, telling them he was organizing group trips or study materials, then keeping the money for himself. When confronted, he would lie so convincingly that even the other teachers believed him over his accusers. David felt pieces clicking into place. What happened to him after graduation? He got into engineering college on scholarship. His academics were excellent. But his father told me later that Rajesh had taken loans using family members' names to pay for expenses. When the family discovered this, he disappeared. That was, it must be over 20 years ago now. 20 years, the exact time frame of David's phone troubles. Sir, did his family ever mention anything about debt collectors? phone calls. Mr. Patel was quiet for a moment. David, his father came to me in 2005, very distressed. Rajesh had been using the family's phone number for all his financial dealings, then abandoned it when he left for the city. The family was getting constant calls from banks and loan companies. They finally had to change their number. David's breath caught. Do you remember what happened to the old number? They returned it to the telecom company. I assume it was reassigned to someone else eventually. Someone else, David. Sir, I need to ask you something important. Are you absolutely certain we're talking about the same person? Rajesh Kumar Baisha from near Kurukshetra. David, I taught that boy for 2 years. I would recognize his name anywhere. But Beta, why are you asking these questions? Has something happened? David explained the situation. The phone calls, the debt collectors, the professional connection. Mr. Patel listened in grave silence. David, he said finally, you must be very careful. Rajesh was the kind of student who would smile to your face while stealing from your pocket, if he is in a position of authority over you. I understand, sir. Thank you for telling me this. David, one more thing. His father mentioned that Rajesh had a habit of using family members' information for financial purposes without their knowledge. If he is still the same person he was 20 years ago, he may be doing this to new people now. After ending the call, David sat staring at his computer screen, his mind processing the implications. This wasn't just about phone calls anymore. This was about a pattern of financial fraud that had been ongoing for over 2 decades, with Raj simply moving to new locations and new victims when his old schemes caught up with him. His phone rang, unknown number. This time, David answered with a different intention entirely. David Mitchell. Good afternoon, sir. This is National Recovery Associates. We're trying to locate Mr. Rajesh Baisha regarding multiple defaulted accounts. Do you have any information that might help us reach him? David looked across the office toward the conference room where Raj was conducting another meeting, gesturing animatedly while 3 junior developers took frantic notes. Actually, David said slowly, I think I might be able to help you with that. David spent the evening researching debt collection laws and corporate policies. If he was going to do this, he needed to be methodical, careful, and completely untraceable. The next morning brought another barrage of emails from Raj, each more demanding than the last. The subject lines read like military commands. Urgent, database schema review required by EOD. Immediate action, client requirements changed, adapt accordingly. Priority 1, weekend work required for timeline compliance. David realized that Raj's management style wasn't just abusive. It was designed to keep his team too overwhelmed and stressed to question his authority or investigate his background. During his lunch break, David walked to a nearby electronics store and purchased a prepaid phone with cash. Back at his apartment, he began making calls. National Recovery Associates, this is Priya speaking. Hello, this is regarding your search for Rajesh Baisha. I received a call from your office yesterday. Yes, sir. Were you able to provide any information about Mr. Baisha's current location? David had rehearsed this conversation. I work with someone who might be the person you're looking for. Rajesh Kumar Baisha, originally from the Kurukshetra region, currently working as a project manager in Seattle. That matches our records exactly. Could you provide current contact information? David gave them Raj's work phone number, work email, and the general address of their office building. I should mention that he goes by Raj professionally. He might not respond to his full name. This is incredibly helpful, sir. We've been searching for Mr. Baisha for almost 20 years. May I ask how you know him? We work for the same company. I recognize the name from your previous calls. Previous calls? David realized his mistake immediately. He'd been getting calls for Rajesh Baisha, not making inquiries about him. I mean, I've heard colleagues mention the name. I see. Well, thank you very much for this information. We'll be reaching out to Mr. Baisha immediately. David ended the call and immediately made similar calls to 3 other debt collection agencies that had contacted him in recent weeks. Each conversation followed the same pattern, providing Raj's professional contact information while maintaining plausible deniability about his own involvement. By Thursday afternoon, David noticed Raj seemed unusually distracted during team meetings. His usual commanding presence was replaced by frequent phone checking and visible tension. "David, I need to step out for a few minutes," Raj announced during their 3 p.m. status update. "Continue with the database review. I'll be back shortly." Through the conference room's glass walls, David watched Raj pace in the hallway while speaking intensely into his phone. His body language screamed stress, shoulders rigid, free hand, gesturing sharply, periodic head shaking. When Raj returned 15 minutes later, his composure was noticeably cracked. "Change of plans," he announced. "We're postponing the client presentation until next week. I need everyone to focus on documentation review instead." Evelyn Liu raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, the client specifically requested the Friday presentation. Won't this delay impact the project timeline?" Raj's response was sharp enough to make several team members flinch. "I don't recall asking for timeline analysis, Evelyn. I said we're postponing, and that's final." David felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Phase 1 was working, but he could see Raj's stress was translating into even harsher treatment of the team. That evening, Sarah called with her research findings. "David, I found some interesting information about your Mr. Bhatia. He's been remarkably successful at staying ahead of his financial problems." "What do you mean?" "He's worked for 4 different companies in the last 10 years, always leaving just before major audits or reorganizations. Very convenient timing." "What about his current financial situation?" "That's where it gets interesting. He's living well beyond what his salary should support. Expensive apartment, luxury car lease, high-end credit cards. Either he has family money or he's found new sources of questionable income."
If you're still here, you're hooked. Admit it. So tap that like and subscribe to keep these stories cooking.
David felt the familiar anger rising. So he's still doing it, still living off other people's money while avoiding the consequences. "It looks that way. But David, there's something else. I found records of several family members in India who have had their credit ruined. Parents, siblings, even his wife's relatives. This guy has been using family identity information for loans and credit cards for years." The scope of Raj's financial fraud was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was systematic exploitation of everyone in his orbit. "Sarah, how many people do you think he's hurt over the years?" "Based on what I found, dozens, maybe hundreds. Family members, co-workers who vouched for him, probably lending institutions that eventually had to write off the losses. The ripple effects are enormous." David stared out his apartment window at the Seattle skyline, lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in this city, Raj was probably having dinner at an expensive restaurant, paid for with money that rightfully belonged to someone else. "I gave his work contact information to 4 debt collection agencies today." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" "Like I'm finally fighting back instead of just enduring." "And if this destroys his career?" David thought about Evelyn Liu's defeated expression, about the 2 a.m. emails, about 20 years of strangers calling him to demand payment for debts he'd never incurred. Then maybe justice exists after all. Friday morning arrived with an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos. David arrived at the office to find Raj's assistant, Linda, looking frazzled and overwhelmed. "Has anyone seen Mr. Bhatia this morning?" she asked as David passed her desk. "He was supposed to be here for a 9 a.m. call with corporate, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." David expressed appropriate concern while internally noting that Raj's phone troubles had apparently begun. He settled at his desk and tried to focus on legitimate work, though anticipation made concentration difficult. At 10:15 a.m., Raj finally appeared, looking like a man who hadn't slept well. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of stress: slightly wrinkled shirt, coffee stain on his tie, and the kind of distracted expression that spoke of serious problems. "Team meeting, conference room B now," he announced without his usual authoritative flair. The team assembled quickly, notebooks and laptops ready for another session of impossible demands and timeline adjustments. But this meeting felt different from the start. Raj stood at the head of the table, but his usual commanding presence was noticeably absent. He kept checking his phone, and when it rang during his opening remarks, He actually paused mid-sentence to decline the call. As I was saying, he continued, clearly rattled, we need to accelerate our timeline for the Pinnacle deliverables. Corporate has some concerns about project visibility. David noticed the careful word choice. Corporate concerns usually meant budget issues or client complaints, but Raj's body language suggested something more personal. Sir, asked David Mitchell, one of the senior developers, are there specific concerns we should be addressing? Performance metrics, quality issues. Raj's phone rang again. This time he looked at the caller ID and his face went pale. He declined the call, but David caught a glimpse of the display, Legal Recovery Solutions. No specific concerns, Raj said, his voice tight. Just general timeline optimization. I need everyone to focus on deliverables and minimize distractions. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Raj's phone rang 4 more times. Each call seemed to increase his agitation, and by the end, his hands were visibly shaking. That's all for now, he concluded abruptly. David, I need to see you privately. After the others filed out, Raj closed the conference room door and turned to face David. His practiced smile was completely gone, replaced by barely controlled desperation. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Have you received any unusual phone calls recently? Anyone asking questions about me or about our work here? David felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. What kind of questions? Personal questions, financial questions, anyone claiming to represent collection agencies or legal firms. This was the moment David had been preparing for. He met Raj's eyes directly and lied with complete conviction. No, nothing like that. Why? Is there some kind of security concern? Raj studied his face for a long moment, clearly trying to determine if David was telling the truth. There might be. I've been getting some suspicious calls, possibly corporate espionage related to the merger. If anyone contacts you asking about our project details or my background, I need you to report it to me immediately. Absolutely. Is there anything else I should watch for? Just be careful who you talk to, and if anyone asks for my personal contact information, don't provide it. Route everything through official company channels. David nodded solemnly. I understand completely. As they left the conference room, David felt a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. Raj was clearly panicking, but watching him try to spin debt collection calls as corporate espionage revealed just how deeply embedded deception was in his character. The afternoon brought visible confirmation that David's plan was working. Raj spent most of his time on phone calls behind closed doors, and his usual stream of demanding emails slowed to a trickle. When he did emerge from his office, he looked increasingly haggard. At 4 p.m., Evelyn Patterson appeared at David's desk with an unusual request. David, could you join me in my office? I need to discuss something confidential. David followed her to the HR suite, wondering if somehow his involvement had been discovered. Evelyn closed the door and gestured for him to sit. I've received some unusual inquiries about Mr. Bhatia, she began carefully. Financial institutions claiming they've been trying to reach him for years. They're asking about his employment status and contact information. David maintained careful composure. That sounds concerning. Is this related to his security clearance or background check? That's what I'm trying to determine. The thing is, these companies claim they've been searching for him for nearly 20 years. That's an unusually long time for routine financial matters. Evelyn paused, studying David's expression. David, you've been working closely with Mr. Bhatia for several weeks now. Have you noticed anything unusual about his behavior or background? This was dangerous territory. David chose his words carefully. He's certainly demanding as a manager, very focused on control and immediate results. Why do you ask? I'm required to investigate any external inquiries about our employees, especially those in management positions. These financial companies are quite persistent, and they're claiming significant outstanding debts. David felt his pulse quicken. How significant? They mentioned amounts in the hundreds of thousands of rupees. If these claims are legitimate, it could represent a serious risk to the company. The room fell silent except for the hum of Evelyn's computer. David realized this was a pivotal moment. He could either help accelerate Raj's downfall or potentially implicate himself in the process. "Evelyn, can I ask you something confidentially?" "Of course." "I've been getting strange phone calls for years. People looking for someone named Rajesh Bhatia about financial matters. I always assumed it was a wrong number situation, but when I heard Mr. Bhaitia's full name in that organizational meeting..." Evelyn leaned forward. "You think the calls you've been receiving are related to our Mr. Bhatia?" "I don't know for certain, but the timing and the name are quite a coincidence. These calls have been going on for almost 20 years. 20 years, Evelyn repeated, making a note. That aligns with what these companies are telling me. David felt like he was walking a tightrope. He needed to provide enough information to support the investigation without revealing his active role in contacting the debt collectors. "Is there anything else you think I should know?" Evelyn asked. David hesitated, then decided to share one more piece of information. "I called my old teacher from India to ask about Mr. Bhatia, since we're from the same region. He remembered him quite well, and not positively. He mentioned concerns about financial irregularities even back in school." Evelyn's expression grew more serious. "David, I need you to document everything you just told me in an email. Send it directly to me, marked confidential. And please don't discuss this conversation with anyone else, especially Mr. Bhatia." "Of course." As David left Evelyn's office, he felt like he'd just crossed a line from passive observation to active participation. The investigation was no longer just about debt collectors harassing Raj. It had become an official HR inquiry that could end his career. That evening, David sat in his apartment drafting the email Evelyn had requested. He was careful to present everything as coincidental discoveries rather than deliberate investigation. But even so, the email felt like lighting a fuse. Before sending it, he called Sarah. "The HR director wants documentation about Raj's background," he explained. "I think this is about to escalate quickly. How do you feel about that?" David looked out his window at the city lights, thinking about all the people Raj had hurt over the years, all the debts he'd avoided, all the family members whose credit he'd destroyed. "I feel like 20 years of injustice is finally catching up with someone who thought he was untouchable." "And your job?" "If this goes badly, I'll find another job. But Evelyn Liu and the rest of our team deserve better than working under someone who treats people like disposable resources." He sent the email and went to bed, knowing that Monday would bring consequences he couldn't fully predict. Monday arrived with the weight of impending reckoning. David reached his desk to find an email from Evelyn Patterson marked "Urgent Confidential" with a meeting request for 10 a.m. But it wasn't just Evelyn. The attendee list included Linda Morrison from Legal and someone named Robert Kane from Corporate Security. At exactly 10 a.m., David knocked on Evelyn's office door. The room felt crowded with 3 additional people, and the atmosphere was unmistakably serious. "David, thank you for coming," Evelyn began. "I believe you know Linda from Legal. This is Robert Kane from our corporate security team." Robert was a tall, thin man with the kind of observant eyes that suggested a background in law enforcement. He nodded politely, but said nothing, letting Evelyn lead the conversation. "We've been investigating the inquiries about Mr. Bhatia," Evelyn continued, "and your email provided some crucial context. We need to ask you some additional questions." "Of course." Linda opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "David, we've confirmed that you've been receiving calls intended for Rajesh Bhatia for approximately 20 years. Is that correct?" "Yes, since I got this phone number in 2004. "During that time, have you ever provided Mr. Bhaitia's current contact information to any of these callers?" This was the question David had been dreading. He met Linda's eyes and made a decision that would either save him or destroy him. "Not until recently," he said carefully. "After I realized my manager was the same person these companies had been looking for, I began providing his work contact information when they called." The room fell silent. Robert leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "When you say recently, can you be more specific?" Linda asked. "Last week, I received calls from several debt collection agencies, and I confirmed that they were looking for my manager. I gave them his work phone and email." Evelyn made notes while Linda continued her questioning. Did you initiate contact with these agencies, or did you only respond when they called you? I only responded to their calls. I've been getting these calls for 20 years. I didn't seek them out. Robert spoke for the first time, his voice calm but probing. David, why did you decide to provide his contact information after 20 years of directing these callers elsewhere? This was the crucial moment. David had rehearsed this answer, but delivering it convincingly was another matter entirely. Honestly, because I was angry. 20 years of harassment because someone abandoned their financial responsibilities, and then that same person becomes my boss and creates a hostile work environment. It felt like justice. Justice or revenge? Robert asked quietly. David considered the question seriously. Maybe both, but if someone owes money and has been evading their debts for 20 years, is providing their contact information to creditors really wrong? Linda and Robert exchanged glances. Evelyn continued making notes. David, Evelyn said, we need you to understand that this situation has escalated significantly. We've now received inquiries from 12 different financial institutions, and the total claimed debt exceeds $180,000 USD. David felt his stomach drop. Even with his research, he hadn't fully grasped the scope of Raj's financial fraud. We've also discovered, Linda continued, that Mr. Bhatia may have provided false information on his employment application. His listed references don't check out, and there are gaps in his employment history that don't align with his resume. Robert leaned back in his chair. David, we're not here to prosecute you for providing contact information to legitimate creditors, but we need to understand the full scope of the situation. Is there anything else you haven't told us? David thought carefully. He'd been honest about providing Raj's contact information, but he hadn't mentioned the prepaid phone or the systematic way he'd contacted multiple agencies. I made sure to contact several agencies that had been calling me rather than waiting for them to call again. I wanted to get it over with quickly. How many agencies? Linda asked. 4 or 5, I think. I have their numbers in my phone log if you need specifics. Evelyn closed her notebook. David, we appreciate your honesty. This situation is obviously complicated, and we understand your frustration with the phone calls. However, we need you to refrain from any further contact with these agencies. Our legal team will handle all communications from this point forward. I understand. Robert stood, signaling the meeting's end. David, one final question. In your interactions with Mr. Bhatia as your manager, have you observed any behavior that might indicate ongoing financial irregularities? David thought about Raj's expensive clothes, his luxury car, his general lifestyle that seemed beyond a project manager's salary. He lives quite well for someone on a project manager's salary, David said carefully. Expensive car, designer clothes, high-end electronics. I assumed he had family money or investments. Thank you, Robert said. We may need to speak with you again as our investigation continues. As David left the meeting, he felt like he'd navigated a minefield successfully, but he couldn't shake the feeling that bigger explosions were still coming. The rest of Monday passed in an atmosphere of barely contained tension. Raj appeared increasingly distracted, taking frequent phone calls and leaving the office multiple times for urgent errands. When he was present, his treatment of the team became even more erratic, alternating between manic demands for productivity and distracted absent-mindedness. At 3 p.m., David noticed a familiar figure in the office lobby through the glass walls. Robert Kane was talking with building security, occasionally gesturing toward the elevators. 20 minutes later, 2 men in suits emerged from the elevator and walked directly toward Raj's office. Through the conference room's glass walls, David watched what appeared to be a very serious conversation. Raj's body language progressed from confident to defensive to clearly distressed over the course of 30 minutes. At one point, he stood and began pacing, his hands moving in agitated gestures. Evelyn Liu appeared at David's desk, her voice barely above a whisper. Is everything okay? Mr. Bhatia looks really upset. I don't know, David replied honestly. Maybe it's about the project timeline. But even as he said it, David knew this had nothing to do with project timelines. This was about 20 years of unpaid debts, finally catching up with someone who thought he could outrun his past forever. The meeting in Raj's office concluded with handshakes that looked more like formalities than friendly farewells. The two suited men left, but not before stopping at Evelyn Patterson's office for another brief conversation. 15 minutes later, David's work phone rang. "David, this is Evelyn Patterson. Could you come to my office immediately? Bring your current project files." David gathered his materials and headed to HR, his mind racing through possibilities. When he arrived, he found Evelyn with Linda Morrison and a woman he didn't recognize. "David, this is Patricia Williams from our parent company's audit department. We need to discuss the transition of your current projects." Transition? Patricia opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "Mr. Bhatia has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into financial irregularities. We need to ensure project continuity during his absence." David felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. How long is this leave expected to last? "That depends on the outcome of our investigation," Linda said carefully. "In the meantime, you'll be reporting directly to David Mitchell as interim project lead." "What about the rest of the team?" "They'll be informed this afternoon. We wanted to speak with you first since you've been Mr. Bhaitia's primary point of contact." Patricia leaned forward. "David, during this transition, it's crucial that all team members maintain confidentiality about the ongoing investigation. We cannot discuss the specific reasons for Mr. Bhaitia's leave with other employees." "I understand. We also need you to compile a complete report of all interactions you've had with Mr. Bhatia regarding project management, financial decisions, or any requests for personal information or assistance." David nodded, though he wondered how much detail they really wanted. Should he include the 2 a.m. emails, the impossible deadlines, the systematic destruction of team morale? "One more thing," Evelyn added. "If Mr. Bhatia contacts you directly during his leave, by phone, email, or in person, you need to report that contact to us immediately. Do not engage in any substantive conversations about work matters." As David left the meeting, he realized that Raj's carefully constructed professional life was collapsing with remarkable speed. 20 years of financial irresponsibility, combined with what appeared to be employment fraud, had created a perfect storm that no amount of charm or manipulation could weather. That evening, David sat in his apartment reflecting on the day's developments. His phone had been mercifully quiet, no debt collection calls, no unknown numbers demanding to speak to Rajesh Bhatia. For the first time in 20 years, the silence felt peaceful rather than ominous. Sarah called around 8 p.m. "So," she said without preamble, "how was the aftermath?" "He's on administrative leave. They brought in auditors and everything." "How do you feel?" David considered the question seriously. "Relieved mostly, but also a little guilty. I mean, I actively participated in destroying someone's career." "Someone who was destroying other people's careers and lives," Sarah pointed out. "Someone who'd been stealing and defrauding people for 20 years. "I know, logically I know that, but it's still a big responsibility." "David, can I tell you something? I did some more research after our last conversation. This guy wasn't just avoiding old debts. He's been taking new loans using false information, including identity theft. The amount of damage he's caused to other people's financial lives is staggering." David felt some of his guilt evaporate. "How do you know that?" "Credit reports don't lie. And when someone has over 30 different loan applications using variations of family members' information, that's not accident or desperation. That's systematic fraud." They talked for another hour, with Sarah helping David process the ethical implications of his actions. By the time they hung up, David felt more confident that he'd done the right thing, even if his methods had been ethically complex. As he prepared for bed, David realized something remarkable. For the first time in months, he wasn't dreading tomorrow's workday. Tuesday morning brought an email that changed everything David thought he knew about the situation. From Evelyn Patterson Ev Patterson at Nexustech. Com to David Mitchell Mitch at Nexustech. Com subject. Confidential, additional information required. David, during our ongoing investigation, we've discovered that you may have additional information relevant to our inquiry. Specifically, we've learned that Mr. Bhatia may have attempted to use employee information for financial purposes. Please report to conference room A at 9 a.m. for a confidential interview with our investigators. This matter requires absolute discretion. Regards, Evelyn Patterson, Director, Human Resources. David stared at the email, his coffee growing cold as the implications sank in. Employee information for financial purposes. That suggested Raj had been attempting identity theft or financial fraud involving his own coworkers. At exactly 9 a.m., David entered conference room A to find a scene that looked more like a federal investigation than a corporate HR meeting. Evelyn and Linda were there, along with Robert Kane, Patricia Williams, and two new faces, a woman in a severe Navy suit and a man with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. David, Evelyn began, I'd like you to meet Detective Sarah Morrison from the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit and Agent Janet Mitchell from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. David felt his stomach drop. This had escalated far beyond corporate discipline into criminal investigation. Detective Morrison spoke first, her voice professional but not unkind. Mr. Mitchell, we understand you've been cooperative with the corporate investigation. We need to ask you some additional questions about Mr. Baisha's behavior and any requests he may have made. Of course. Agent Mitchell opened a folder thick with documents. Mr. Mitchell, did Mr. Baisha ever ask you for personal information? Social security number, banking details, personal references, anything of that nature? David thought back through his interactions with Raj. Not directly, no. But now that you mention it, he did ask me to fill out some forms that seemed unusual for project management. What kind of forms? Emergency contact forms, updated personal information sheets. He said it was for the new organizational structure after the merger. But thinking about it now, we'd already provided that information to HR. Detective Morrison and Agent Mitchell exchanged glances. Did other team members fill out similar forms? I think so. He had everyone update their information during our first week under his management. Agent Mitchell made notes. Mr. Mitchell, we've discovered that Mr. Baisha has been using employee information to apply for credit cards and personal loans. Your name appears on several applications. David felt the room spin slightly. My name? What kind of applications? Credit card applications totaling over $40,000 in available credit, and 2 personal loan applications for $15,000 each, all using your personal information combined with fabricated employment and income details. The violation felt profound and personal. It wasn't just that Raj had stolen information. He'd attempted to destroy David's financial reputation just as he'd done to countless family members over the years. Were the applications approved? David asked. No, Detective Morrison replied. The credit agencies flagged inconsistencies in the applications, but the attempt constitutes identity theft under federal law. David realized that his phone number situation had probably saved him. 20 years of being contacted about Rajesh Baisha's debts had likely created enough confusion in credit databases to trigger automatic fraud alerts when applications appeared in David's name. How many employees were affected? David asked. All 7 members of your immediate team, Agent Mitchell replied, and we're investigating whether this pattern extends to his previous employers. The scope of Raj's criminal behavior was staggering. He hadn't just been evading old debts. He'd been actively creating new fraudulent accounts using his current employees' identities. Mr. Mitchell, Detective Morrison continued, we understand you provided Mr. Baisha's contact information to debt collection agencies. We need you to understand that this action, while ethically complex, may have prevented additional identity theft. These agencies have now provided us with crucial evidence of his financial crimes. David felt a complex mixture of vindication and responsibility. His decision to connect the debt collectors with Raj hadn't just been revenge. It had inadvertently exposed ongoing criminal activity. What happens now? David asked. Mr. Baisha was arrested this morning on charges of identity theft, wire fraud, and financial crimes conspiracy, Agent Mitchell explained. The investigation is ongoing, but we expect additional charges as we uncover the full scope of his activities. Evelyn Patterson spoke for the first time in the meeting. David, we need you to understand that your employment is not in jeopardy. Your actions in providing contact information to legitimate creditors were within your rights, and you've been fully cooperative with our investigation. We will need you to provide a formal statement, Detective Morrison added, and you may be called to testify if this case goes to trial. Are you willing to cooperate? Absolutely. As the meeting concluded, David felt like he was emerging from a 20-year nightmare. The phone calls would finally stop, Raj would face consequences for his actions, and the team would be free from his toxic management style. But more than that, David realized he'd learned something important about the difference between passive endurance and active justice. For 20 years, he'd simply tolerated the harassment caused by someone else's irresponsibility. When he finally decided to act, he'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that was actively harming new victims. Walking back to his desk, David felt lighter than he had in years. His phone sat quietly, free from the unknown numbers that had plagued him for 2 decades. Around the office, his colleagues were working without the constant pressure of impossible demands and psychological manipulation. Evelyn Liu approached his desk with a tentative smile. David, I heard Mr. Bhatia won't be coming back. Is that true? That's what I understand, David replied carefully. I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm relieved. I was starting to think there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't capable of meeting professional standards. David looked at Evelyn. Brilliant, hardworking, and completely demoralized by weeks of psychological abuse from someone who'd been systematically stealing from all of them. There was never anything wrong with you, Evelyn. Some people create chaos to hide their own problems. As the day continued, David began documenting his experiences with Raj for his formal statement to law enforcement. Writing it all down, the impossible deadlines, the 2 a.m. emails, the systematic destruction of team morale, he realized how much damage one person could cause when they prioritized their own interests above everyone else's well-being. But he also realized something else. Sometimes justice requires action, not just patience. For 20 years, he'd waited for the phone calls to stop on their own. They never would have. It took deliberate intervention to connect consequences with actions. 3 months later, David sat in his apartment reading the Seattle Times article about Raj's sentencing. Local project manager sentenced to 5 years for identity theft and financial fraud. The article detailed a criminal conspiracy spanning multiple states and affecting over 40 victims, with total damages exceeding $800,000. His phone rang, his personal phone, the number that had caused him 20 years of trouble. But this time, the caller ID showed Sarah's name. Did you see the article? She asked immediately. Just finished reading it. 5 years seems appropriate. The article mentions that victims' information led to the initial investigation. That's you, isn't it? David smiled. The article protects victim privacy, but yes, I think it's safe to say my phone calls played a role. How do you feel about it? It was a question Sarah had asked him many times over the past few months, and his answer had evolved each time. I feel like justice was served, finally. Not just for me, but for all the people he hurt over the years. Any regrets? David considered this seriously. I regret that it took 20 years for someone to hold him accountable. I regret that so many people suffered because he was allowed to keep moving and finding new victims. But do I regret providing his contact information to people he legitimately owed money? No. The past 3 months had brought significant changes to David's life. David Mitchell had been promoted to permanent project manager, and the team's productivity and morale had improved dramatically. Evelyn Liu had been promoted to senior developer, her confidence and creativity flourishing in an environment free from psychological manipulation. David had also received a commendation from corporate leadership for his role in uncovering the identity theft scheme. The letter, signed by the CEO, praised his integrity and courage in bringing criminal activity to the attention of authorities. But perhaps most importantly, his phone had been quiet. No more unknown numbers, no more debt collectors looking for Rajesh Bhatia, no more strangers demanding payment for debts he'd never incurred. The silence felt like freedom. Sarah, can I tell you something I realized during all of this? Of course. I spent 20 years thinking I was a victim of someone else's irresponsibility. And I was, but I was also passive about it. I accepted that this was just something that happened to me rather than something I could change. And now I understand that sometimes being ethical requires taking action, even when that action feels uncomfortable or complex. Raj hurt people for 20 years because no one connected his actions to their consequences. The debt collectors couldn't find him, his employers didn't know his history, his new victims didn't know about his past crimes. David paused, looking out his window at the Seattle skyline. I became the connection between his past and his present, and that made all the difference. Do you think you'd do it again, in a similar situation? In a heartbeat, but I'd be smarter about it from the beginning. I'd document everything, involve authorities earlier, and focus on protecting potential victims rather than just seeking personal justice. Their conversation continued for another hour, touching on David's plans for the future, Sarah's own career developments, and their shared relief that the long saga was finally over. After hanging up, David opened his laptop and began typing an email to Mr. Patel, his old teacher in India. He'd been meaning to update him on the situation's resolution. Dear Sir, I hope this email finds you and Auntie in good health. I wanted to update you on the situation we discussed regarding Rajesh Bhatia. You were right to be concerned about his character. He was arrested 3 months ago for identity theft and financial fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The investigation revealed that he had been stealing from coworkers, family members, and financial institutions for over 20 years. Your warning about his behavior in school proved accurate. He never changed. He just became more sophisticated in his methods. Thank you for your honesty when I asked about him. Your information helped me understand the scope of his criminal behavior and take appropriate action. I wanted you to know that justice was finally served, not just for the phone calls I endured, but for all the people he hurt over the years. With respect and gratitude, David. As he sent the email, David realized that this experience had changed him in fundamental ways. He'd learned the difference between patience and passivity, between forgiveness and enabling, between personal justice and broader responsibility. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn Liu. Team celebration drinks Friday. David's buying to celebrate our project success. David smiled and typed back, Absolutely, we've earned it. For the first time in 20 years, David looked forward to his phone ringing. 6 months after Raj's sentencing, David stood in the same electronics store where he'd bought his prepaid phone for the investigation. This time, he was looking at the latest smartphones, finally ready to upgrade his system. Can I help you find something? Asked the sales associate, a young woman with enthusiasm that reminded David of Evelyn Liu. I'm looking to upgrade my phone, but I want to keep my current number. It has sentimental value. She smiled. Of course, sentimental numbers are important, family number or something special. David considered how to answer. How do you explain that a number that once represented 20 years of harassment had become a symbol of justice served and wrongs made right? It's the number that taught me the difference between enduring problems and solving them, he said finally. The sales associate looked puzzled but nodded politely. Well, we can definitely transfer it to any new device you choose. As David completed his purchase, he reflected on the unexpected journey that number had taken him on. From a prize won through academic achievement, to a source of constant frustration, to the tool that ultimately brought a criminal to justice. Walking out of the store with his new phone, David realized that some numbers are more than just digits. Sometimes they're threads that connect past actions to present consequences, responsibility to accountability, patience to justice. His phone rang as he reached his car. For a split second, the old anxiety flickered, but then he saw Sarah's name on the caller ID and answered with genuine joy. How's the new phone? She asked. Perfect, same number, better technology. Any regrets about keeping the number? You could have started fresh. David looked at his reflection in the car window, seeing someone who looked older and wiser than the young man who'd first bought a premium SIM card with scholarship money 20 years ago. No regrets, he said. This number is part of my story now, the part where I learned that sometimes justice requires courage and that the right action isn't always the comfortable action. And if someone asks you about the experience years from now? David smiled, starting his car and pulling into Seattle traffic. I'll tell them about the phone number that changed everything, not because of the calls I received, but because of the call I finally decided to make. As he drove home through the city he'd called home for so many years, David realized that his story was both ending and beginning. The 20-year saga of Rajesh Bhatia was over, but the lessons learned would influence every decision he made going forward. Sometimes the most important numbers in our lives aren't the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding difficult situations, but from facing them with integrity, courage, and a commitment to justice that extends beyond our own immediate interests. David's phone number had started as a symbol of achievement, become a source of frustration, and ultimately transformed into an instrument of justice. Not bad for 10 digits and 20 years of patience. His phone remained mercifully quiet for the rest of the drive home, but David no longer feared its ringing. After all, he'd learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the call you're waiting for is the one you need to make yourself.
The story's over, and now it's your turn. Was that justice? Comment your thoughts, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.